Hi and welcome to this video. In this video I'm going to be going over the new feature called the Scene Exporter. This is a brand new feature in MayaStar 6.0 and this is a wonderful feature. It's going to have a lot of possibilities for people out there to use. Okay, so let's go to the first, show you where it is. Okay, so here's the MayaStar menu. This is a feature that is actually inside the My Animate Light functions, and it's this one right here, Scene Export. Now, what this feature is for, it's for you export out your objects as an OBJ, not a DAE, right? And then this creates, when you click on it, when you go through the steps, it will create an LSL script that you put inside a Reser, and that after you've uploaded your objects and make sure they're named the correct names, and you put in a special script inside the objects themselves that tells the Reser to be able to communicate to the objects. You then put inside the Reser another script which is generated by the Scene Exporter, and that script will contain all the rotations and positions of all of the objects in your scene, or at least the ones that you have selected. There is a 72 object limit to LSL. LSL can only handle up to 72 objects, so there is somewhat of a limit, but what you can do is simply, if you have more than 72 objects, you can select the first 72 objects, export out, and then select the next number of objects. If it's another 72 objects, you can do another 72. If it's another 5 objects or whatever you want to do it, up to 72 each time. Then you give it a different name, and then you export it out, and then you'll have an LSL script for those objects. So the benefit of this exporter, the Scene Exporter does not export out the objects themselves. Okay, you export out your objects like a regular DAE, like you've always done, and you can either export them out individually as individual DAEs, or you can export them out all at one time as one giant DAE with all your objects in it. Then you bring it into Second Life, you then res it on the ground, you ungroup it, you make sure all the names, and I'm going to go through all these steps here in just a minute. But so this, and it's sim wide, it goes as high up as you want, and it goes, it will only move things, it won't res things across or move things across sim boundaries, at least not the center point, the pivot point of an object. It won't go past the sim. But you can, with this, you can create a whole sim in Maya with all these, orientations and different rotations and stuff like that, and then you'll be able to create a Reser, and like I said, it will move everything perfectly. The alignment is amazing. Okay, so anyway, so let's start off here a little bit. Okay, so this is your standard the small avatar that you get when you activate, like say I just activated the female original. Okay, so it's a small avatar. It's 100 times smaller than the Second Life avatar. So whenever you're going to be using this Scene Export, you want to make sure that you've created things to the right scale. And so I'm going to change the avatar from centimeter scale, which is, that's what this is, the small. Doesn't change the working units, it just changes the size of the avatar. So if you want to know the relative sizes of things. So we go to meter scale. Okay, oh, and I have already created a pyramid in the scene. Okay, so this is my mesh pyramid. Okay, and this just gives you an idea of the size it is. You can always go into create to see how big something is. You can go create, go to your measuring tool and go distance tool, and you can click snap to point on, and if say I want to find out how big this pyramid is, I could click there, and then I could click over here, and this tells me that it is I think it's 18 meters. It's 18 meters long. Okay, because the working unit has to be in centimeters. That's the other thing you got to know, is that the working unit has to be in centimeters, and that's the default for that's the default working unit for Maya. Whenever you start a new scene, it changes. It stays centimeters. So, but if we switch this to meter, just to see, yeah, I was right. 18 meters, 0.888887256 long. That's the size of the object along this length right here. So it is 18 meters. Now, I got to switch that back, otherwise it's going to mess up the script. So we're going to switch this back to centimeters. Okay, so we're going to switch that back to centimeters. Okay, and this is also good where, you know, if you do that, if you want to be able to see the grid better. So that's one of the things that's handy about this new feature that we have in here, to be able to go from the default size. This is the meter size grid, but it has subdivision snapping between the meters, and then this is just no subdivision snapping, so it's just going to snap to the meters where these lines cross. But anyway, so that, yeah, you can see that so it's 18 meters long. Okay. So, and I think the biggest objects you can upload to Second Life is 64 meters big. So, but the sim is obviously bigger than 64 meters, so that will help you place everything you need to go and everything like that, your objects. And okay, so I got my pyramid. I created a pyramid, and I broke the pyramid into individual pieces. Okay, and there's even these pieces in between, these sort of like grooves. They're all separate objects, but you can see in Maya everything is lined up perfectly. The edges are all lined up perfectly, so it looks like it's one object. Okay, this is really good if you're creating say a house, and it's bigger than 64 meters, and so you need to break it up into smaller pieces. Or if you're placing stuff in the house, decorating it, and so that you have individual objects such as tables and chairs and lamps and rugs and all sorts of stuff inside your mesh house, but you want them as separate objects, not just a single object, but you want them to line up precisely where you want them to be. That's what this is really great for it. So if you had a mesh that was bigger than 64 meters and you need to cut it up into smaller pieces so that it will upload, this is perfect for that. This is perfect for that. So like I said, I created a pyramid, I cut it up into pieces, I created this groove that ran around, with the bevel and all that kind of stuff. And now they're separate objects. Okay. One thing you got to remember is that the center pivot point has to be in the center of the object. Now, when I originally cut this up, like down here, the center of the object was up here. So when I separated it, it might throw it, when you separate things like that into separate objects, it might throw their pivot point off. So just make sure that after you do any cutting, and all that kind of stuff, before you do, after you've done any cutting and splitting apart of mesh, each mesh you want to make sure that you go to modify center pivot to make sure that the pivot point of the different meshes are actually at the center, because that's where everything is being measured from in Second Life, is the center of the object, or the pivot point center of the object. And that's how the script knows where the object is and where to set it. Okay, so okay, and also, if say I made this pyramid smaller and I scaled it up to make it bigger, and so the scales were different, you want to make sure you do a freeze transformation. Rotations are fine. You can change the rotation of anything that you want. Say I wanted to make this 72. So it changed the rotation, right? Went from that to 72. Okay. That's fine. You can change the rotations and all that kind of stuff. Just don't change the scale. Once you've got it the right size, freeze transformation on it to make the scale 1, 1, and 1. Okay. Okay, so we got it at 72. You know, we got it at 72. It's sitting flat on the grid. Everything's cool. It doesn't have to sit flat on the grid like this object up here is up off the grid. So that's like I said, you can create something, a sim that is a whole sim, you know, and all the way up to as high as you want it to go. I think the highest you can have mesh, I think, is 4,000 meters, I think. But this will actually record stuff higher than 4,000 meters. But it may not be able to place it higher than 4,000 meters. But it can place items as high as 4,000 meters and sim-wide. The other thing you want to remember is the center of the grid, right between her feet where those two lines go. That is where your res box, that represents your res box. Okay, that represents where the res box is going to go. So it's going to, when the res box is working in world, it's going to move this pyramid to the relative position to the center of this grid, which would be the where the res box is. Okay, so keep that in mind. So the center of the grid is right at her heel, you know, right between her feet on the ground. That is the center. So when you res your res box on the ground. The center of the pivot point of the res box is going to be up about here, which means everything in the scene is going to be raised just a little bit. So you've also got to keep that in mind. When you're placing your res box, make sure that the center of the box is right on the ground if that's where you want all your objects to be. Is right flat. Say you have a sim that has just a flat piece of ground. Okay. Okay. So we have our mesh, you know, we've got these different pieces. We've got it rotated where we wanted to rotate it. Everything is the center pivot point on each of the mesh is the center pivot point of the mesh itself. You know, we did you select the mesh, modify, center pivot. So you make sure the center pivot is the center on all the mesh. Okay. And they can be separate meshes, even though this looks like it's one mesh. It could be, I could have a sphinx over here and it cut up into several different pieces and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be relative to the center of the grid, not relative to each other's objects. So it doesn't matter that these objects, it looks like it's a single object, but it isn't. So they don't, so anyway, so yeah, so we got that going. So what you do is to export out your scene, it's really easy. You just select all of the mesh in the scene that you want to export out. Like I said, you're limited to 72 objects per export. So you select that. You come in here to MayaStar and you click on Scene Export, and this little window will open up here. I'm going to close this just so it's not in the way. And the very first thing you want to do is you want to browse to where you want to save it. So I'm just going to save this to the desktop, and we'll go to demo video. And I'm going to say, and you can see I already have a couple of tests that I did earlier, but I'm going to do another one. We'll say this is demo video of pyramid. Okay, and then I'm just gonna, oh, I screwed up. Okay, that's, sorry. You don't put anything here. You just go to where you want to save it and click save. Okay, here's where you put the name in. Almost screwed that up. Here's where you put the name in. So you click here to browse to where you want to save the file. You click save. Don't put anything in here. And then you put the name of whatever you want. And you can have spaces in your name, that's fine. And then you click export. and this will give you a little thing letting you know that it's finished and that the LSL has been generated. This doesn't actually export any objects. It doesn't export out the objects. Okay, now you can either export out the objects as a DAE all at once, or you can export them out individually as an individual DAEs. I tend to like to export them out all at the same time. So then I just go File, Export, Export Selection, DAE, and then upload them to Second Life, upload the DAE. Okay, and I'm going to pause the video and log into Second Life. Okay, so here I am in Second Life. Actually, this is the beta test grid. And I've uploaded the pyramid. I uploaded it as a single object, as a single DAE. It's multiple objects inside the single DAE. And let me res that on the ground here real quick. Okay. Okay, so here it is. It is this, but it's individual objects. Okay, it's a single DAE. But when you res it on the ground the first time, the single DAE, you'll have to unlink it. Okay, and then you'll have to make sure that each piece you have to name the name that it was in Maya. So these are the names that I had in Maya. So that's the first thing you got to do is is do that. And like I said, since this is a single object, it's smaller than 64 meters. Did I really need the scene exporter? No. But when you're doing a whole sim, or you're doing a very, very large object that you have to cut up into smaller pieces because it's bigger than 64 meters, even though once an object, even if it's multiple pieces, is bigger than 64 meters, the box that contains all those objects is bigger than 64 meters, it won't upload. Or no, I don't know if it will upload with the 64 meters if it's bigger. I think it might upload. But anyway, like I said, yeah, I don't think it will upload. No, it won't upload once it's bigger than 64 meters. Anyway, so, okay. So, like I said, so after you've gotten your objects, and they don't have to be in this configuration, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They don't have to be lined up while you're doing this. So anyway, so I renamed all the objects the name that they correspond with in Maya. I also you have to add a script to those objects, and it's called an object repositioner. So all you do is you just drag the script in. That's all you have to do, is drag that in, and you just do it for each piece. Okay, so you said that's all you do is you drag it in, you drag in each of these the OBJ repositioner script into them. Okay, and I'm not going to do that on all these because just for time's sake. Okay, so now I'll go on to the next step here. I'm just trying to keep this video as quick as possible, so I'm just going to delete those. Okay, and then once you've dragged in the OBJ positioner into all of this, into all of the objects, you then bring those objects into your inventory, and that's what I've already done here. This is the one, the pyramid, that's multiple objects that I resed up, just as if I had downloaded the DAE and resed it, changed the name, drop in the script, and then take a copy of each one of those. Take each one of those into your inventory. Okay, now this is a box. It's just an empty box, and this is going to be my reser box. So I just created a cube, put it on the ground. Make sure that you do not rotate the cube in any way, because that will change the rotation of all the objects. They'll still go to their relative positions, but then they'll be rotated. And believe you me, that can really mess up your build. So don't rotate the object. The stuff that's in here will res relative to the pivot point of the object. So right now I have this object at the exact center of the sim, which is 128 by 128. That's the exact center of the sim, so that would be like the exact center of the grid. Now, if you say you don't have a full sim, say you have a smaller piece of land, well, just find out where you want the res box to be in that smaller piece of land, and that's going to be where the center of the grid is going to be in Maya. Okay, so there's no magical number. There's no magical reason for 128 by 128 here. If you were doing a whole sim, this is where you'd want this box to be, because that's the easiest place to put it. But like I said, so everything is going to be positioned relative to the res box. So that's got to keep that in mind when you're doing this. So if you don't have a full sim, figure out where you're going to want to put your res box, and then in Maya, figure that's the center pivot point, the center of the grid that's where that res box is going to be, and place your objects accordingly. Okay, so we got our box, and we just go into the contents, and we're going to grab the individual objects of our pyramid, and we can just drag that over, and now we got all our objects in here. And now we click on new script. Okay, and now we double click on the new script, and you go File, Load from File, and we're going to go, there's the demo video file folder, and there's the LSL, the demo video of pyramid, and that comes in here just like that. Okay, and so there's the LSL, and you click Save, and then you can close that, and you can close that out. And now all I have to do is touch the box, and it's going to start resing the individual pieces of the build, or that are in the box, and then it moves and rotates them into position. Awesome. It moves and rotates them into perfect position. See, 72 degrees. So it moves and rotates them into position perfectly. Okay, now you'll notice there's a little bit of gap down there. That's because, like I said before, the center pivot point of the res box is slightly off the ground. So if we wanted to fix that, now this can be moved now, and it's not going to, nothing's going to happen over here. So I'm going to delete these, and I'm going to delete those, and I'm going to res it again after I move the box into the ground. Okay, let's edit. I'm going to actually flatten it just to make it a little bit easier to see where the pivot point of the res box is, to make sure it's right about there. And now I can make it bigger again. Okay, so you see it's half in the ground, half out. That's right where the pivot point of the box is. So now if I click the res, it's going to res the pieces. Exactly where they're supposed to be. And there's perfectly on the ground. Look at that. Perfect. And before you take these pieces into your inventory, you can do whatever you need to do. I think I remember I made them solid, and I uploaded them with the physics shape and all that kind of stuff on the DAE. So now this is solid, and it's here. Now I'm going to show you what will happen if you decide to rotate the box. Okay, so I'm going to rotate the box, say, let's rotate the box 45 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to rotate the box 45 degrees. If I click the box again, it's going to res out another copy. But you see, it moves it to the same relative position on the sim, but it's rotating. It's rotating the objects. Now that's fine with all the objects lined up like this, where they all had the same pivot point straight up and down. So they all rotated on the same exact axes. That's why it looks okay. But if you were doing a house or something like that, and you had a house broken up in different pieces, unless it's a perfectly symmetrical house where the pieces are all lined up exactly on the X and on the Y, it would look messed up. So that's why you don't want to do that. That's why you don't want to rotate the box. You want to leave the box right where it was. You don't want it to have. You don't want to have it rotated at all. Like I said, it will not rotate. I mean, it will not. I'm trying to get rid of these things. Delete. It will not move things across a sim border. Okay, you got to keep that in mind. Is that it will not res things or move things across a sim boundary. It only will stay inside the sim itself. So you got to keep that in mind. Now, if you have an object that is, say, it's really long, 64 meters long, it's the center pivot point that it won't move across the outside the sim. So on your builds, be very, especially if you have neighbors, be very careful when you're creating your build in Maya that your build doesn't overlap that boundary. Like I said, it's the center pivot point that matters when it's moving it. So awesome. This is a really wonderful addition to MayaStar. What are some of the benefits? What are some of the benefits of doing this? You can tell I still have a super old flight feather on. That's hilarious. Anyway, if those of you who know what a flight feather is. Anyway, what are the benefits of being able to export your scene out like this? Well, say you're doing an animation, right? Say you're doing an animation and you want to make sure that the objects match up with the animation perfectly. You know, you could create a very elaborate scene of objects that you've created, and you want them to be placed in Second Life extremely precisely, you know, and you want the animation to play exactly precisely with those objects. Well, you could place your animation inside the box, the res box, along with the objects themselves, and it would res the objects perfectly in place, and then you would have the origin of your animation at the center of the grid, or the center of the same place, you know, as the resed objects, and therefore your animations would play absolutely perfectly. You know, mind you, if your avatar is much taller in Second Life or shorter in Second Life than the animations that you've made with it, yeah, you're going to have some things that are off a bit because of the difference in the height of the avatar. But overall, you'll get, you know, a much more accurate animation, especially if you made an animation specifically for an avatar of a specific height and specific arm length and all that kind of stuff. Then you would have an absolute perfect animation. So this is good for animations. You can use it with animations, but it's really awesome with when you're creating your own builds in Second Life, so that things line up exactly perfectly. you know, so that there's no seams showing whatsoever. So anyway, so awesome. So that's it for this video. Like I said, this is a fantastic new feature for MayaStar, and I hope you guys will really enjoy it. Awesome. Have a great day.